I realized the question people are not asking in India is whether God exists or not.
Yeah.
But they always ask the question, why your God is the right God? Why what you are saying is right
Yeah.
and what we are saying is wrong?
Yeah. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Reasons Podcast. If you like podcasts like these, do follow our social media platforms on YouTube, Instagram, and so on. And also, if you want to know more about Reasons to Believe, do visit our website www.rtbapac.in. Also, if you are interested in some of the books that we have, do visit our website where you will get them for a very brilliant price as well. You know, today in this Reasons podcast, I'm joined today by Dr. Belsi Isaac. Thank you so much, sir, for coming here. Dr. Belsi is a vice principal of the Kairos Center for Theology and Leadership in Lucknow, where he's been working there for about 20 years, and he teaches theology, ethics, and religion. And sir, we are so glad that you are here, and we just wanted to hear more about your story. It's such an amazing a thing to know about you and what you've done, your journey in apologetics, your interests in theology, and so on and so forth. So, help us understand, what was it that made you interested in apologetics?
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to come and talk to you. And I'm so grateful for the Ministry of Reasons to Believe. And I also want to recommend these books because these are the great books, and at least one of the books I have read, great books to read. My parents were missionaries from down south who came to central India, and they were pioneering missionaries among a certain group of people, and they were the first one to arrive. So during the early days of my parents' ministry, it was abject poverty in our family. We lived in a dilapidated mud house. We had no food. We had no resources at home. So during those days, whenever I used to feel hungry, I would go to my mother and ask, "Mummy, I need food." And she would just take a glass of water, pray over it, and give it to me and say, "You drink it and take your Bible, go down and pray to Jesus Papa." So early days, as I was small, I would do that. I'll just go and then I'll say in Hindi, "Yeshu Papa, mujhe bhook laga, mujhe khana khila dijiye." And every time this was being repeated, almost every week this was being repeated. And as I was growing up, I would listen to the sermons being preached on Sunday where it was said that God is good, God is God of blessing, God blesses you, God takes care of you according to his riches in glory. All those statements would come to my mind and it would create a confusion. Especially the story of Israelites was the most difficult for me to digest because God gave them everything according to Old Testament narratives. Even when they were feeling hungry for meat, the narrative says that God provided ample meat to them. And here I am hungry and I'm not getting anything. So as I grew up, I came to class 10th, I realized that one question kept swirling in my mind. And that question was, I never questioned the existence of God. I always believed there is a God. I always believed the God my parents are preaching does exist. But the biggest question that I had in my mind was the goodness of God, the providence of God. Does God provide? And my question were heightened by the fact that my parents left southern India, came to North India for a mission that is mandated by God himself. And yet they are for 14, 15 years suffered hardships which were unspeakable. And where is God? Where is the God of provision? Where is Jehovah Jireh? These questions became the question that was so disturbing to me. So in a way, if you can say, I became a person like deist who believed that God is there, a transcendent God, but he's so far away from human existence, so far away from the human affairs that he's not bothered about him. So that was the question that pushed me into thinking. And then when I went to the theological seminary for my bachelor's, one day I came after my class, and I was just lying down. Somebody played a cassette, and the cassette was on "Can Man Live Without God?" And as I was listening to the cassette, well, in fact, I will not say I was understanding it. I was not understanding it, but I understood the flow of thought, even though the concepts were hard for me to grasp. But I felt that this gives a certain kind of answer to the question that I am looking for. And so what I did was I went to the friend who was playing the cassette and asked him, "Give me the entire cassette that you have." So he gave me the entire cassette, and I started listening to these speeches given by uh, the scholar who was talking on these cassettes, and I kept on listening. And then after, I started understanding a bit about it. Then I went to one of my senior, who was a brilliant guy, and I asked him, "Can you help me to understand what this scholar is speaking in the cassette?" Instead of speaking to me, instead of explaining it to me, he gave me a book. And the name of the book was Christian Apologetics by Norman Geisler. So I picked up the book, I started trying to read it, and I couldn't understand a bit about it because it was too tough, and the concepts was so foreign to me. But I kept pursuing reading that book. And that's where my journey started. That's where my journey started. And then I started to look at the biblical scripture and its understanding. My understanding changed because that book gave me a fresh perspective on God, which answered the question of providence that I always harbored through my childhood. And that's where my journey of apologetics started, because it started to answer some of the questions that I was struggling with. So after Geisler, I read, then I started reading one book after another, and probably that's where my journey started in apologetics.
Wow, amazing. And I totally agree with you when you said that, Christian Apologetics by Norman Geisler lost you. The same happened to me when I first read that book as well. And what I really appreciate about your journey is because you came from that background where you suffered yourself. You were struggling with those questions. But now that you've been through that, understanding what the goodness of God meant, I think that would actually speak volumes now. And I'm sure maybe you would like to share, how you actually came to grasp the concept of the goodness of God after what you've been through. What was it like after reading all of these books? Did you finally came to an understanding of why God may have allowed you to suffer in that thing? Or is it the fact that maybe there was a purpose behind all of that where it actually led you to where you are today?
Okay. As I was saying, this book lost me completely because I was not understanding the book. Then I read some other books, and again, they were technicals. Because my friend was recommending books and he was well read and I was not. So all the books was difficult for me. But then one of the books that really touched me, well, I don't exactly remember the title, but this book was about the crucifixion of Christ. And it talks about the love of God. And it brought the angle of love of God and the crucifixion in a way that I had never seen before. I always felt that cross is the way of salvation. I never understood it from the perspective of love. For me, it was salvific, vicarious suffering. But I never looked the cross from the point of view of love of God. So when when I read that book, I looked at the story starting from Genesis and how God created and his working in the history and how it culminated on the cross. That was a point where I realized that, yes, the outworking of God's love is different from what I envisaged in my life. I felt everything has to be personal. But in God's great schema of things, the way he looks at human existence is very different, is what I understood from that book. So then my trajectory of understanding changed completely. And I started to look at the things from a different perspective altogether. And instead of looking at God from a judgmental perspective, which I harbored the ideas, I started to look at the entire God's plan from the perspective of His love. And when I started to see the love of God in every aspect of His work through the history and human history, things started to change for me. And I realized that the the reason we suffered had a greater purpose. It was not God left us, but there was a purpose behind it. And then I remember I went back to, after reading that book, I went back to my place, and I looked at my parents, and there was this. I still remember this was a Sunday service, and after the Sunday service was over, there was a lot of people in my home. They were having they were everywhere in my home, like everywhere, in the bedroom, in the kitchen, everywhere. Someone were having food, some were sleeping on a bed, and my parents were talking and ministering to the people. And I was looking them, and I thought to myself, is it not the expression of God's love?
Mm.
Is it not the expression of God's love? And I felt to myself that my parents became a channel of God's love to the people around.
Mm.
And even though they suffered, things have not changed much now. Things are still the same. The suffering is still there. But the smile on the faces of people really changed my perspective. Because I realize now it is the expression of cross, the expression of God's love on the faces of my parents, reaching out to the people who are in need.
Wow, amazing. That's an amazing answer to this question. I think, when we talk of theodicy, when we look at everything from the perspective of God's love, I think our suffering, our the pain that we go through, there's always a purpose behind that. And I think your story is beautiful as well. What interests me, Dr. Belsi, about your life is in your master's, you wrote a thesis on the selfish gene, which was a very popular book when it came out, where, evolutionary biologists were trying to understand morality in terms of a naturalistic evolutionary process. So I just wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on that, and what conclusion you came to, after your studies? Yeah.
Yeah. As when I came to masters, of course, being interested in apologetics, you were interested in the origin of life. Yeah. So I realized that as I was reading all this evolution books on evolution and the evolutionary theories, I realized that one of the prominent answer that a Christian theists, not Christians, theists give is responding to them about the question of morality and the moral fabric of human society. And it is and I realized that the evolutionary scientists and biologists have difficulty answering that question, how moral values, how moral fabric develop into human society. Even if you say like Durkheim that it's all conditioned by the society, but doesn't answer the prescriptivism of the moral nature. Then came 1976, this book by Richard Dawkins named Selfish Gene Theory. And then he extended it by another book called The Extended Phenotype, which developed on the book by W.D. Hamilton, which came in, I think, if I'm right, in 1966, where he talks about uh, gene as the fundamental replicators. And he said the organisms are nothing but the vehicle for the gene to express themselves. And so I think in the book, The Extended Phenotype, Dawkins says that he was trying to answer the question of altruism. Why the human society or even in the animal kingdom, they behave in an altruistic way. So I realized this is a Dawkinian attempt to answer the question of the morality which he finds in the society. And I found it very interesting because he used the term selfish. There are scholars who critique it in saying that it's an anthropomorphic way of saying about gene, which does not have any kind of moral embedded in itself. I felt that what he was trying to say, this Dawkins was trying to say that the altruistic nature of gene is basically in order to replicate, the chances of replication. If a gene is able to replicate, so it takes all the instead of talking about natural selection of the organism, he was talking about the selection of the genes replications, and that's where he was using the term selfish, that a gene will find out the ways to replicate himself, and so gene is in a way selfish.
Yeah.
But what interesting thing I found was that word itself, selfish in itself, is a moral word. It's not a moral word. It is a moral word. So he is using a moral word to explain morality, and I found that interesting. And I found that in a way contradictory to what Dawkins was trying to do. So yes, then I started reading about. I did a paper on selfish gene, and one of the questions that I found that it was difficult for Dawkins to answer is, even though he was able to explain in a way how the society works and how society developed the moral fabric, but the prescriptivism that for example, stealing is wrong. That is a prescriptive word. Yeah. That's a prescriptive statement. The prescriptivism is not being able to answer. That answer is still not there. Even though he tried to do by coining something called memetics, meme, which he actually picked up from gene, rhyming with gene. So he tried to do cultural sociobiology by using the word beam, but I think even through both the books, the prescriptive aspect he still couldn't figure out. He couldn't answer that. Why there is a moral obligation among the society that you have to do this. That's the right way, and this is wrong. So that was the conclusion that I reached in my thesis.
Oh, amazing. So what you're basically saying for our viewers is that morality actually is something that is transcendental.
Yes.
And cannot be reduced to just our genes.
Yes.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I mean, we would love to read your work on that as well. And
Thank you.
I mean, that was a brilliant explanation of that. And, since you've been working in the Department of Theology and Ethics and Religion, and you must be very well versed with the many religions that we have in Asia Pacific countries, and with your interest in apologetics and, even coming to scientific apologetics, where you did your thesis on the selfish gene. Now, my thought is to ask you this question. What is the relevance of apologetics in a pluralistic culture like ours in the Asia Pacific region? And how do you think that we can use apologetics maybe to further the cause of the biblical worldview?
Sure. This is when I was studying apologetics. So there is the stream of apologetics named as classical apologetics, which deals with the classical questions: does God exist, and the classical answers to those questions, using ontological argument or teleological argument, so on and so forth. But then, when I came out of my theological institution, became part of a theological college, started teaching, and also I started mingling with people around, and I started speaking to students and going to colleges and talking to them. I realized the question people are not asking in India is whether God exists or not.
Yeah.
That question I never heard from Indian audience. Probably at least one or two times. Apart from that, I don't remember listening to that question anytime. But they always ask the question. Why your God is the right God? Why what you are saying is right, and what we are saying is wrong? So I realized that's where the crux of Indian apologetics rests. That it is not the question whether God exists or not, but the uniqueness of Christian faith, the uniqueness of confession, the uniqueness of Christ and the cross of salvation.
Yeah.
So that's where the crux of the Indian apologetics is. So I believe this is the time for us not only to understand theology, but also to make it meaningful to the society. So apologetics that right now we need in India is not only to make gospel meaningful, but at the same time to answer the questions that the people of other faith have towards you, and to answer them meaningfully, not with the categories of classical apologetics, but in a way that you can create a dialogue with them and understand their perspective and respond to them respond to them explaining the uniqueness and why what we are saying, the truth of the Christianity, the veracity of Christian confession is to be said to them in love. But that's where the crux of apologetics in India right now stands.
Wow, amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Belsi, for your amazing insights. And ladies and gentlemen, if you like, the podcast that we have, if you liked this episode, kindly like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And also, please make sure that you share this with your friends and contacts as well. Once again, thank you so much, Dr. Belsi Aiza, for joining us for our Reasons podcast. This conversation was amazing. And I'm sure that the apologetics, the crux of our apologetics in the Asia Pacific context, indeed has to be love, and to do it with gentleness and respect as well. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for listening to us.
Thank you.